The book of Ezekiel is a book in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it is believed to have been written by the prophet Ezekiel, who ministered and prophesied to the Israeli exiles in Babylonia. Ezekiel was a contemporary of the other prophet Jeremiah, which I believe, if I'm not correct, Jeremiah wrote Lamentations and the book Jeremiah, which directly preceded the book of Ezekiel. And so you kind of like, within the book of Ezekiel, you get a kind of different perspective on the whole, situation that Jeremiah was talking about regarding, Israel's punishment, prophecies about the future, prophecies about the exiles, and so on and so forth. And so the things that are described in the book of Jeremiah and the things that are described in the book of Ezekiel are often very similar, although many of the prophecies in the book of Ezekiel and Jeremiah are about different things. Ezekiel obviously tells more prophecies concerning the exiles, ministers more about the exiles and what their fate will be, but also talks about the fate of Jerusalem and of God's wayward people. I got a decent amount from Ezekiel. It's not my favorite book in the Old Testament. I thought I was going to like it more than I actually did. There are some really great parts of Ezekiel. All the visions at the beginning of Ezekiel and throughout Ezekiel are so oh my gosh, this is... I started looking up, and I highly recommend this, looking up illustrations of Ezekiel Chapter 1, to see the beasts that are described in all of Ezekiel's visions, and to see illustrations of Ezekiel eating the scroll, and that whole stuff. It's really, really cool. And so all the, I guess you could say trippy visions that Ezekiel, experiences are absolutely fascinating to read about, as are the prophecies that he prophesies. The only thing about a lot of the prophecies that Ezekiel prophesies is I don't know, how many of them actually came true, how many of them were accurate, and so the prophecies a lot of the time didn't really affect me as much as they would probably affect me if I knew more about the historical context in which these prophecies ended up manifesting in, or if they manifested historically. But still, just reading about what Ezekiel is prophesying, even if I don't know the exact historical reality of his prophecies, was informative in a way, because large portions of Ezekiel talk about, it's kind of like the end is nigh situation. It's like doom and gloom is coming. Israel is going to be punished. God's people are going to be punished because they have disowned their father. It's this kind of stuff, which is common throughout all the Bible, is it really spoke to me at times, because I look at just the way civilizations rise and fall, civilizations apart from Israel, and the things that Ezekiel describes about the evil of the people, and the complacency that precedes these sorts of collapses, was really, it was kind of freaky to read about it. And so I did get, as I said, a decent amount out of Ezekiel, and there are certain, passages that definitely were very convicting to me. Concerning my own personal faith. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to jump into the review and analysis portion of this review and analysis video, where I talk specifically about the verses, passages, and chapters within Ezekiel that I found to be particularly compelling, gripping, and absolutely worth talking about. The first passage I would like to read and discuss is Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 18 and 19. When I say to a wicked man, you will surely die, and you do not warn him or speak out to dissuade him from his evil ways in order to save his life, that wicked man will die for his sin, and I will hold you accountable for his blood. But if you do warn the wicked man, and he does not turn from his wickedness or from his evil ways, He will die for his sin, but you will have saved yourself. Now this passage comes directly after Ezekiel had had this wild vision with all these beasts and God, on his throne looking down at Ezekiel and giving him this scroll to eat. This is what this passage is directly following. After that vision that Ezekiel had had, he had just basically spent a week just overwhelmed, just thinking about this whole situation. And now God is speaking to him once again, and he says what we just read. And to me, this passage is obviously God is speaking to Ezekiel, but he's also speaking to just everyone in general. And this passage I found to be fairly convicting, because there are times whenever I let things slide. I have a friend or I have a family member who's doing something that is bad, and I don't say anything because I just don't want to get into a fight. I don't want to have to argue with them, and it's this passage was quite convicting, because it says, and if you do not warn him or speak out to dissuade him from his evil ways in order to save his life, that wicked man will die for his sin, and I will hold you accountable for his blood. And so this passage is kind of like, it kind of gets me, and it kind of shakes me, and it's kind of like saying, Carter, whenever you see somebody that somebody that you love, doing, wrongdoing, it's your duty to correct them. It's your duty to speak. It's your duty to tell the truth, because if you don't, not only will that person, perhaps perish, due to the consequences of their actions, but you, in a way, will be responsible for them perishing because you did not say anything. And so you must say something. You must do something. You must confront that person and do your best to gently correct them. So this passage, I just kind of I read it and I was like, man, I need to be more vigilant about, holding myself and those I care about accountable whenever it comes to living a good life. Now, the next portion of Ezekiel that I would like to discuss is Ezekiel chapter 16. And this chapter, it spoke to me because there's so much truth in this chapter concerning just wayward civilizations and wayward people, rebellious people that have gone astray. And this passage highlights how we take things for granted. We take the grace that has made us for granted, because this whole chapter is basically an allegory of unfaithful Jerusalem, where God talks about how, basically he made, Jerusalem into this great, amazing place for all people. And what has happened in Ezekiel's time, and what basically always happens with, civilizations at their cultural zenith, is they begin to prostitute themselves. They begin to lose their identity. They begin to just be pulled in every different kind of direction, and what they end up doing is they forget the things that made their country, their nation, their civilization great and moral and good. They forsake all of that. And there's this phrase, there's this sentence that's repeated over and over in this chapter, where God says, basically, this is just one example, this is verse 22, "And all your detestable practices and your prostitution, you did not remember the days of your youth, when you were naked and bare, kicking about in your blood." Now, the whole naked and bare, kicking about in your blood, that is something that God describes as, basically, this is how he found Jerusalem. This is what Jerusalem was before God made Jerusalem and the Israelites into a great and mighty people. And they've forgotten that God was behind all of their prosperity. And now they have forsaken that, and doom is near. And I just read this chapter and I go, man, countries like America and European countries and others, that are very, very well advanced, have all these freedoms, and how all these privileges, you know, many of them were founded on Christian traditions and views of morality. And now, just about all of these civilizations I just described are drifting away from that foundation that perhaps was the primary reason for, or that led to the prosperity that we now all take for granted. And I just look at this chapter and I go, man, are we about to deal with what the the Israelites had coming to them? Are we doing the same exact thing that they're doing? Have we forgotten our days, the days of our youth when we were naked and bare, kicking about in our blood? I think perhaps we have, because many of us don't know history, we don't know our cultural underpinnings, and we don't know, just who we even are. I don't even know what it means to be an American anymore. The whole phrase, the United States, I don't understand that anymore. And most people don't understand that anymore. And I just, golly, I mean, this is what I described earlier as, the Old Testament and the book of Ezekiel. There are things that are written within here where I'm just like, golly, I see parallels between what was happening then and what is happening now. The next portion of Ezekiel that I would like to discuss is Ezekiel chapter 18. And I personally love this chapter. I think it's amazing because it explicitly explains why children should not be punished for the sins of their fathers, and vice versa. Basically, this whole chapter is like, hey, guilt by association, that is not justice. And so I love this chapter, but I've got to say, this chapter reminds me of a big issue that I've had throughout many portions of the Old Testament, which is that, the maxim that, each person should be judged according to his own sins, that is repeated over and over within the Old Testament, within the Bible as a whole, and yet the Bible appears to contradict itself on this matter. It says the right thing, and then God does the wrong thing. I think it's 1 Samuel, 1st or 2nd Samuel, where David, if I'm remembering correctly, is told by God to kill the men, women, and children of the Amalekites. And I read that passage and I go, wait a minute, the children, you mean even little babies, those should be killed too? Beings that are incapable of moral actions? And you're understanding what I'm getting at here. It seems to be a contradiction, because the only reason for why those little babies would deserve to die is if God was judging those little babies and condemning those little babies, those children, because of the sins of their mothers and fathers. And this contradiction occurs, it occurs with the Egyptians. God seems to be kind of hypocritical on this issue, and I don't say that lightly. I don't like saying that, but I have to be honest. That's what it seems like whenever I read the Bible, and I need to do some research in order to find out, if there are answers to, that might explain why this is not actually the big deal that I think it is. But as of right now, it seems like a really, really massive problem that disturbs me greatly. Another thing within chapter 18 that I found to be fairly interesting was verse 24. I'm just going to read it and then we'll discuss. But if a righteous man turns from his righteousness and commits sin and does the same detestable things the wicked man does, will he live? None of the righteous things he has done will be remembered. Because of the unfaithfulness he is guilty of, and because of the sins he has committed, he will die. It seems to me that this passage kind of flies in the face of the mentality among some Christians who say, once saved, always saved. In other words, that, if you become a Christian and walk away from the faith, you're still going to go to heaven, or something like that. Moving on to chapter 26, I don't have any portion of this chapter that I actually want to read, but chapter 26 concerns the prophecy of doom against the city of Tyre, which was, I believe, a city on an island. And in my Life Application Bible, it kind of discusses some of the external historical, or the possible external historical backing up of this prophecy. And I'm just going to read this kind of footnote, and yeah, we'll discuss. After a 15-year siege, Nebuchadnezzar could not conquer the part of Tyre located on the island. Thus, certain aspects of the description in chapter 26, verse 12 and 14 exceed the actual damage done to Tyre by Nebuchadnezzar. But the prophecy predicted what would happen to the island settlement later during the conquest of Alexander the Great. Alexander threw the rubble of the mainland city into the sea until it made a bridge to the island. Then he marched across the bridge and destroyed the island. Today, the island city is still a pile of rubble, a testimony to God's judgment. If what my Life Application Bible says here is accurate, then that is astounding, because it literally says in verse 12, they will plunder your wealth and loot your merchandise. They will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses and throw your stones, timber, and rubble into the sea. Now, chapter 26 is talking about King Nebuchadnezzar doing this, and as my Life Application Bible pointed out, Nebuchadnezzar was not able to fully destroy the city of Tyre. But Alexander the Great did come along and did, as it said here, throw the rubble of the mainland city into the sea until it made a bridge to the island. That is insane. If that is correct, if this external historical information that my Life Application Bible is informing me of is correct, then that makes Ezekiel's prophecy concerning the city of Tyre absolutely astounding. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to Ezekiel chapter 37, which is where you have the famous vision, the Valley of Dry Bones. And this vision is essentially described in verses 1 through 14. And I just gotta say, people these days talk about psychedelic drugs, and it's like the cool thing that people talk about now on podcasts and whatnot. I almost think that a way to get people interested in the Bible again is just to be like, hey, read the book of Ezekiel or Daniel or the book of Revelation. There's some psychedelic trippy stories there, even if they weren't directly caused by psychedelic drugs as far as we know. Because goodness gracious, the Valley of Dry Bones vision and prophecy, it's a trip. And I was quite mesmerized by it, especially when reading what my Life Application Bible says concerning what the vision actually means. It's passages like these in Ezekiel where I'm like, dude, make this into a movie. And that's it for me, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously I did not go through large portions of the book of Ezekiel, although it's all worth, going through yourself. It's just that those particular verses, passages, and chapters were the verses, passages, and chapters that spoke to me personally in a very powerful way. But now I want to know what you thought of the book of Ezekiel if you have read it. So, if you have read the book of Ezekiel, what did you think of it? Please leave whatever comments you might have in the comment section below. And if you haven't read the book of Ezekiel, but you found this video particularly interesting, then please also leave any comments or questions or thoughts you might have in the comment section below. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, if you like this video, please like it and subscribe, tell your friends about the channel. And never forget to